Living in a desert can definitely be creepy. Very hot and sweaty during the day, but chilly and almost freezing during the night. It seems to be such a bipolar landscape and provides some of the creepiest stories that I've ever heard. These 10 people share with us their creepiest encounters in deserts. So, I'm an alien geek. I like the idea of aliens, and I think it's cool to think of how big the universe is and all that. However, I am pretty skeptical that there are beings visiting us just to mess with our crops, mutilate some cattle, and probe us and peace out. I know there are other reasons and theories behind visitations, but dang, why don't we have more concrete evidence? All that being said, I remain an alien geek enough that I took a 2-hour detour while driving my family from Las Vegas to Salt Lake City to drive by Rachel, Nevada, and see Area 51. We wanted to get some souvenirs. We were running late, so by the time we got back on Highway 93 to head up into Utah, it was probably 10 p.m. and super dark outside, but the stars were bright because there is nothing out there. We were probably 60 miles from the last car we had seen in Rachel, and that is when we saw something. The whole encounter took probably a minute and a half. First, I saw a horizontal arc or semicircle of about 12 lights that flashed on and were brighter than anything else in the sky. When I saw them, I just yelled to my wife, "What am I looking at?" She just gasped and questioned further. The semicircle sequentially blinked off after a few seconds, and we were left questioning. It was below the scattered clouds, and I started guessing at what it could have been. Maybe airplane flares, but they did not seem to be moving. Of course, being the hopeful skeptic that I am, my eyes are glued to the sky. But 20 seconds later, I see something darkening the clouds in front of us, like I could see it swoop in front of the stars. That is when the same brightness, dozen or so lights, turned back on in a clear triangle shape, and a few seconds later, another grouping of lights blinked on next to the triangle, creating a diamond. The diamond shape was not connected to the triangle, and it seemed to be static since it was shining through a light cloud. Mind you, these second lights were clearly surrounded by a cloud, but they were not dimmed at all by the cloud. But both shapes were perfectly symmetrical and seemingly facing us, the only people within 50 miles. These lights tracked us for about 15 seconds, and I yelled to my wife to grab the phone for a camera. Almost the instant she brings up the camera, the lights goes out. We see another flash far above the clouds a few seconds later, but they are gone. My question is, what on earth did I see in the middle of the Nevada desert 2 days ago? When I was 10 years old, I was out camping in the desert with my family and friends. This was something we had done every summer since I was very young. There were usually 3 to 6 families, all with multiple children, and we would set up a large camp. One of our families, good family friends, owned a trucking company and was into all kinds of vehicles. They would typically bring a huge trailer with about 10 to 15 ATVs, motorcycles, sand buggies, etc. Then, everyone else brought a few of their own. This ensured there was always something to ride for everyone there, even the kids, as there were multiple 80cc quads. We would go out on large excursions with all these people, driving through the Mojave Desert to various locations. I'm guessing the adults had previously scouted out some interesting destinations. This time, I guess they wanted to scare us. First, we went to an old abandoned mental hospital, or so they claimed. This place had a huge Olympic-sized swimming pool, which was completely destroyed and almost deeper than anything I've ever seen pool-wise. It was filled with all kinds of trash and old burnt-out cars, and the usual leftovers of humanity. It was 3 stories inside, extremely large, and was completely empty. Some of the older kids were jumping through the halls, which were extremely old and brittle drywall, pretending to be the Kool-Aid Man and such, breaking through walls. Shortly before we left, a couple of the younger girls, they were standing on the porch upstairs, and apparently it nearly collapsed while they were on it. I didn't see what happened. I just knew they were terrified, and a lot of parents were upset about it. Next, we went to an old abandoned shack. This is when things got weird. We started exploring this shack, which was like a 1-bedroom cabin, and it was obvious that someone was still living there. I can't recall exactly, but I think there were food scraps, water bottles, and clothing strewn about. This was extremely unnerving, because this place was completely decayed and on the verge of collapse. Suddenly there was a big commotion from the bedroom, and people were saying that we should take pictures, and generally looked like they had seen something strange. Of course, we all headed into the bedroom. In the middle of the ceiling was a dead tropical parrot. There was a hole in the ceiling, and his head was stuck through it, and it was just hanging there. At this point, I remember someone approached it, reached out towards it, and suddenly it started spasming, and everyone started screaming and freaking out. It twisted loose or something and took off through the window, which was just an opening in the rotted wood at this point, and flew away. That was the end of our excursion for that day. We all rode home, and in retrospect, I realized that whatever or whoever was scouting these places out apparently wasn't doing their due diligence and bringing 20 children along with them to play in abandoned desert structures. This happened to me when I was in high school. When I was around 16 years old, and although I may not have been in immediate danger, it still shook me up. I lived in a small desert town in California at the time, where there wasn't much to do in forms of entertainment if you were under the age of 21. The main population of the town is either elderly or gay, so any teenagers that lived there were kind of ignored. I hung out with an interesting group of girls who were not into drinking or recreational use of drugs, which was a pretty rare thing from where I was from. We were the honor roll kids, but that didn't mean that we didn't get into our fair share of trouble from time to time. We enjoyed urban exploration, breaking into abandoned buildings. There were a lot of abandoned country clubs and shut down outlet malls in the area, where we spent a lot of our time. There were a couple of times we have gotten into some serious trouble with the law enforcement, but we were at the age where you feel invincible, like nothing could possibly happen to you. Sometimes, the places we went weren't abandoned though, just closed or having construction done. Those places were sometimes harder to get into, but were closer to populated areas and generally safer. The playground attached to the preschool was small, intended for toddlers. It had a short brick wall around the front, with much taller walls along the sides. The back wall was the tallest, must have been over 9 feet with street lamps overhanging. The light of it was spilling into the school's driveway. All we had to do was hop over the 4-foot wall in the front to get in. We had to be cautious that night, because for some reason, there were cars coming down the road, which I had previously mentioned people rarely used. Patiently, we waited for a car to go by, crouched along the wall. Then, once the headlights no longer had the preschool in view of what we would hop over, we jumped in. I remember throwing the snacks over at one point, and when I threw the jug of Arizona iced tea, one of my friends failed to catch it and the lid popped off from the impact. A small geyser of tea flew up into the air, and we all laughed. I was the last to go over the wall, mostly because I was not very athletic and was more likely to fall and land on my feet. I waited for another car to pass before jumping over, so I wouldn't be seen. It was a red pickup truck. I remember distinctly. I didn't think too much of it, hopped over after it passed. With the way the street lamp hung over the playground was set up, the light actually didn't illuminate the playground, but the roundabout driveway in front of it, leaving us in shadow. Which was perfect, as it meant that no one would even see us if they looked into the playground. We quickly found a bench to sit on and started eating our junk food and talking quietly, trying to keep our laughing from being too loud. We were sat for maybe 30 minutes when we noticed that a car pulled into the roundabout driveway. We went silent and ducked as the headlights turned our way. The car drove back onto the road and out of sight. We assumed that the person probably wanted to turn out without driving all the way to a stoplight and then left it at that. Another 5 minutes and it happened again. A car drove into the driveway. We assumed it would be for the same reason, and that they just wanted to turn around. But the car stopped. It idled for a good while, maybe 2 or 3 minutes. My friends and I got nervous. We didn't know what someone would be doing at a preschool in the middle of the night, besides us, obviously. I noticed absently that it was a red pickup truck. Finally, the person inside got out, leaving the car on. He walked straight up to the 4-foot wall and stared into what could have been, from his perspective, darkness. Above us, there was an overhang to provide shade for the bench that we were sat at, giving us an even greater cover of darkness, so we could not have seen our now crouched forms. The strange thing is that the way the light was, we couldn't see his face, but I could make out that he was an older white male, probably in his late 30s, with a shaved head. He was wearing a button-down shirt and slacks, but I could not see his face. The man continued to stand there, seeming to stare at us. He said nothing, which freaked us out the most. If he was there to tell us to leave, why didn't he say anything? And if he couldn't see us, why didn't he leave? I could hear the pickup still idling. I wanted to escape, but he was standing there just like smack dab in the middle of the smaller wall, and there was no way to get out. What if he grabbed one of us? One of my friends touched my arm to get my attention. Without any words, they motioned to the other 4-foot wall. It connected to one of the side walls on the left. On the other side of that wall was an empty lot that led into the desert. That wall had a jump of around 7 or 8 feet. But if you stepped where the shorter wall connected to it, you could leverage and jump over it. I was scared. I was not fast or athletic in the slightest. What if I fell or couldn't pull myself over the wall? I didn't want to keep sitting there with this strange man staring at me anymore, though. The same friend that got my attention before got us all to look at her as she held up her fingers to count down. We were all going to try to get over the wall at once. When she got to 1, I bolted, leaping on top of the shorter wall, vaulting myself over to the other side of the wall, and then not worrying about where I landed. I somehow ended up landing in a roll instead of on my feet. I sprung up and started running towards the nearest light source, a Ralph's. I didn't stop until I was in front of the store, and that's when I looked around and realized that my friends were with me. All 4 of us had made it out. While we stood in front of the Ralph's, catching our breath, some of us letting our nerves get out by laughing, I noticed a car pulling up into the parking lot. The same red pickup truck. The windows must have been tinted, because once again, I was unable to see the person that had been watching us. We couldn't go inside to the store because it was closed. There were still cars in the parking lot, probably belonging to the employees inside. I don't know why we didn't call for help. Maybe we felt as though we would get in trouble for being where we shouldn't. The red pickup didn't stop, but instead circled the parking lot several times. Each time the car passed us, I felt like he was going to get out and snatch one of us. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he gave up and drove away. We took off running right away to the nearest friend's house since we all lived so close together. Once we reached our destination, we collapsed on the lawn, and we talked about how freaky that whole experience was. Tonight, my sister, brother-in-law, 2 friends, and I piled into my truck
and we headed out to a desert area near an old Cal Portland concrete factory. About a half hour into drifting, kicking up dust and messing around, everyone gets the chills, and my anxiety starts to flare up a bit. We brush it off as the temperature difference and keep going. 10 minutes later, we come around a corner, and my sister says, "Please tell me you guys just saw that woman." We respond, "What woman?" And she says, "We just passed a woman, standing on the side of the road wearing a pink shirt. She had blonde hair and it was covering her face, and she looked dead." I honestly thought she was messing with me. So, we turn around and go to the spot that she saw the lady, and there was no woman there. My brother-in-law and I get out with flashlights and look around. No woman. I tell my sister she's seeing things, and she insists that she saw this woman. So, I decided to check my dashcam footage. Sure as shit, there was a woman. She was crossing the road. It looks like, and then she just vanishes into thin air. My camera isn't the best quality and it was extremely dark, but it's very clear what she saw. My brother-in-law and I canvassed a 2-mile square radius on foot with flashlights, calling out to this woman because we legitimately thought there was someone lost out in this desert. The entire time we kept feeling and hearing things all around us. I live with my grandmother and my grandfather. Not getting into why I do, just so you know. I live in a small town in the middle of a desert. I'm not saying what state or the name of the town for privacy. Well, here is how it all started. Me and my family were looking for a new house while going to see other parts of my family for Thanksgiving. We came across this little town in the middle of a desert, and it had a restaurant, so we stopped there and ate. We loved the town, so we started looking for houses. We came across many of them, but there was one that we loved. It had a sandy yard, trees surrounding the front of the house, a screened-in front porch, and a huge back deck. The place was beautiful. It had a for sale sign on the fence around the place, so we called the number on it and bought it. We'd never expected anything to happen at first, but then we found out the previous owners died. But not in the house, but they are dead. Then things started happening. The first thing occurred when my aunt was looking in the closet in the master bedroom and said she saw a shadow person standing in there. She freaked out and turned pale. The second incident happened to my grandfather. He was sleeping in the living room, and since we did not have any beds there, he looked down to the hallway and he saw a mist with the lady in a wheelchair in the mist. This is the third incident, and this one happened to me. It's the scariest one in my opinion. I was staying up late one night, playing games on my Xbox 360, and I got thirsty, so I decided I wanted to go get something to drink. So, I went to the kitchen, and my kitchen is connected to my living room, so you can see through the kitchen into the living room. But when I got to the kitchen, it was not what I expected. I saw a lady coming from the living room into the kitchen walking towards me. I bolted back to my room and slammed the door shut. Later, I came back and found all of the cupboards open and a chair from the kitchen and a lounge chair in the living room upside down with a pillow on top of it. It had one of my pictures and a few of the cupboards in the chair. It was just so weird. I just can't explain it. And to this day, I'm still at a loss for words. This is one of the most recent occurrences, and it's one of the biggest occurrences. I was trying to find something in the closet in the master bedroom where my aunt saw the shadow person and the door shut by itself, and something grabbed my leg and pulled me back into the closet. I just don't know how to explain these events. They're some of the scariest things I've ever experienced. So I am currently 20 years old, and this story happened either when I was 16 or maybe 17. I was out with a bunch of friends, wrecking havoc around our hometown, as teenagers do. And about 9 or 10 p.m., after the sun had set, we spontaneously decided that we wanted to go camping. We live in Arizona, east of Phoenix, and in our area, there was a lot of open desert where people often threw parties or camped or shot guns at random garbage for fun. If you look up the Superstitious Mountains, you can get an idea of where we were. We went to our usual spot and got a fire going, and just hung out for a little bit. We didn't have any drugs or alcohol. In total, there were 6 of us. I believe myself and 4 other guys and 1 girl. After a bit, 4 of us went to take a walk, while 2 of the guys stayed behind and kept the fire going and under control. We didn't have any flashlights or anything to light our way as we walked down a trail into the dark desert. However, it was a mostly full moon of cloudless night, and we pretty much could see everything around us, within 50 feet probably. Typically, we didn't go far from the campsite, because it was nighttime and it's a very sketchy place in the desert at night. But with 4 of us, we knew we'd be alright. After we were out of visible distance of our campsite, mostly due to lots of tiny hills more so than distance, we were all just talking and laughing when we noticed this weird glowing figure. It is very hard to describe accurately, but I would say that the figure was about 4 feet tall. We were maybe about 25 feet from it. It appeared to glow a whitish-greenish color and stayed entirely still. One of my friends said it looked like a boy with a large glow, making him very blurred and difficult to see. But I personally saw a blur of light. Also, my friend didn't mention this detail until the next day, so it could be made up, who knows. I don't know which one of us spotted it first, but it was all too obvious that we all saw it. It just gave us this urge to run. I instantly thought about horror movies where people get split up and are even more vulnerable, and quietly, calmly told my friends that we should not run and we should just try to be as calm as we can. Because if this were any kind of animal, like a mountain lion, bobcat, coyote, or whatever, it could get startled and attack. There were also some free-range cattle out there, so we didn't need to anger any bulls, though it was definitely not a bull. We all slowly walked back towards the campsite, with myself and one of my guys watching to make sure nothing followed us. But this figure was quickly hidden by a small hill after we walked maybe 30 seconds. At this point, my rationality kicked in and I decided that we must have just been seeing things. My logic was, there are lots of old street signs and random crap in the desert, so maybe the moon reflected off a sign and we overreacted. My friends agreed, and we cautiously walked back over to the hill, towards where we saw the figure. It wasn't until we had walked past where the figure was standing that we realized it was gone. At this point, we were pretty freaked out, so we went back to the fire quickly and carefully. At the campsite, the other 2 guys thought we were pranking them, but when we started hearing this squealing, chirping noise, almost like a bird and much more distorted and creepy sounding, it sounded like it was approaching us. By this point, our nerves got the best of us. We dumped a ton of water on the fire, packed the truck, and got out of there. We searched 2 or 3 more times for the figure in the glowing week, both during the day and at night, but we never saw anything similar to it again. And despite that experience, we camped there again without anything out of the ordinary happening. I still do not know what it was. It was summer. I believe the day after 4th of July. My husband and I were in the middle of a cross-country road trip. We were driving through Texas, and for any of you who have ever driven across the entire state of Texas, you know that it is very long and very barren. Sometimes we go without seeing anything for hours at all, and the towns we did pass through didn't consist of much more than a rusty gas station and a few dusty little houses. Looking out the window, you would swear you were just driving through the same 5 miles of desert, again, and again, and again. I had started getting a headache, and my husband suggested that I take a quick nap to get rid of it. I remember allowing myself to doze off as I watched the beautiful colors of a desert sunset. The slowing of the car woke me up, and the first thing I noticed was how dark it was. I believe it was around 10 p.m. My husband had stopped at a gas station with a small shop. He told me he was going to grab us some food and asked if I needed to pee. Knowing I might not have another chance for quite a while, I went into the shop to use the bathroom. Both the men's and women's restrooms were down a little hall from the open area of the shop. I was groggy and tired and realized how badly I needed to pee, so I shuffled into the restroom. As I made my way to the short distance from the door to the nearest one of the two stalls, I made eye contact with a woman coming out of one of the other stalls. She didn't look quite homeless, but she was definitely messy looking. She had wild gray hair, almost shoulder length. It's like it hadn't been touched or brushed in weeks. She was wearing a ragged looking clothing, a pair of ill-fitting black workout shorts, and I remember noting her foam flip-flops. Several layers on top, one of them being a large purple and green coat. Keep in mind that it's Texas in July. The jacket was just hanging on her shoulders, crooked like she hadn't been bothered to take a few more seconds to put it on correctly. She was carrying something in a tied-up plastic grocery bag. I gave a quick smile as our eyes met and she just stared at me in return. Then her face turned wild and intense looking. Her eyebrows were set as if she was angry, but her eyes looked wild. She looked at me as if she was hungry, and this is when I felt the first tinge of something wrong. I tried to brush it off. She waddled over to the only sink, and I took my time shutting the stall door because something about her posture in front of the mirror struck me as odd, and I was trying to figure it out. She was standing with her body more angled toward me, but her face was turned to the mirror. Her body was tensed, legs slightly crouched as if she was ready to act. Her hands were not up by her face for trying to fix her mess of hair or even being washed. They were at her sides, also slightly bent. I wasn't sure why, but I suddenly felt uncomfortable. I regretted leaving my purse and cell phone behind. I shut and locked the stall door and took my time using the toilet. I wanted her gone before I left the safety of the stall. I stayed there long after I had finished, but the woman was still there, so I waited longer. Finally, I heard the smacking of her flip-flops as she made her way to the door. I heard it open and then slam closed. The door was pretty heavy and had slammed the same way when I had entered. I stayed for a moment and allowed the wave of relief to wash over me before I reached for the lock, then paused. My fingers only an inch from the lock, I stayed as silent as I could as I managed to confirm that what I had just heard. Yes, breathing. The woman had only pretended to leave. At this point, I was scared and confused. Why had she tried to trick me into thinking she had left, only to stick around and be as quiet as possible? I knew something was very wrong, so I stayed in the stall even longer, and this time, it must have been at least 20 minutes, but I had no way of knowing for sure. I could not tell from the direction of her breathing where she was. I couldn't see her feet or anything, so I just had no idea. Finally, I heard her leave. This time I waited a few minutes to make sure she hadn't tried her trick again. I slipped out of the stall, quickly washed my hands, and rushed down the hallway to the store. It was pitch black outside and I had no idea where she was. She couldn't be far. A large man was checking out at the register, so I waited near a window display until he left the store and quietly slipped out the door behind him. Sure enough, crouched outside the front door is the woman. She seemed surprised as she stood and turned away, walking quickly around the side of the store. My husband was waiting in the car and asked me if I was okay since I had taken so much longer than usual, and I said that I would tell him about it once we were away from that store. My old roommate moved to California this weekend, and some friends and I drove to help her move in and check out the new place. I left a lot later than everyone else, so I ended up driving alone. I live in Arizona, so the drive is only about 6 hours from where I live. When I was driving there, I didn't see anything strange, other than a lady walking her dog in nothing but a bra and panties when I was filling up gas at the station that was basically in the middle of a desert. No, not really pertinent to the story, but I just thought it was strange. Anyway, I got to my friend's at about midnight. Like I said, I left really late. I only stayed for a day and left the next night. Before I left, I told my friend I would take her back with me, since she lives fairly close to me, so why not kill two birds in one stone? When we left, we took a different route than I came. When I was heading there, I took the Interstate 10. Coming back, I took the Interstate 8. If you aren't aware of the area, there are a few things you should know. Interstate 8 is basically on the border of Mexico, and driving from probably anywhere to Arizona, if you can imagine, it's all rock and desert terrain. It was 9 or 9:30, and I don't remember if I was in California or Arizona at the time, but I think it was Arizona. It probably doesn't really matter. Anyway, as we were driving down this road, we saw this really bright light that seemed to be at the top of a rock. These roads aren't so well lit, so it was really out of the ordinary to see this light in the middle of the desert. At first, we thought it was a light-up pole, but as we got closer and we got a better look at it, mind you, I was going at about 80 miles per hour, so I was going pretty fast, but when we got close enough to see it, I swear to God it was a man. This thing, whatever it was, had a head, arms, a body, and legs to it, and it was glowing, like its whole body was made of light. I thought I was driving too fast because I wanted to keep an eye on the road, so I only got like a half glance at it, but my friend looked at me and asked if I saw it too. "You saw a man, right?" The rest of our drive was in silence. We haven't talked about it, but I can't help but thinking that I saw something that I shouldn't have. Maybe I'm just paranoid, and it was just a trick of my eye or something. But if someone knows about this or has ever seen whatever this is too, please let me know. I'm just going to cut to the chase. My mother was arrested for drug possession one summer evening this year. My ex-roommate and myself were invited to stay at my mother's friend's house that very night because the house was experiencing severe problems regarding the electricity and power. It was about midnight when we began to turn off the lights, as well as the TV, and prepare for bed. About 20 minutes later, I hear what sounds exactly like my mother's voice calling my name from what I assume was outside. It absolutely shocked me, so much that I shot up like a bullet and stared directly at the front door in the distance. I thought I was going insane when I asked my roommate if she heard it too. She replied with a yes, and I had just had a meltdown. I learned that morning that my mother was in the police department all night, which was a pretty good damn far distance from the house that we were residing in. I've experienced paranormal activity just about my entire life. Everything ranging from blue lights hovering over our desert town, only to shoot across the sky in a blink of an eye, to ghostly women gripping my hands when I was a child, and leading me to different places within the desert. Perhaps one of the weirdest was some kind of canine hollering sounds that I've never heard before, but not from a dog or coyote or any local wildlife that I'm familiar with. It just didn't seem natural, nor right. I always try my best to remain skeptical about supernatural or the paranormal, but goddamn, that voice mimicking my mom was absolutely wild.